Hey, I think there are still some people looking to join, but we'll start now. I'm John Martin St Valery, Chairman of British Business Group, Dubai and Northern Emirates. And I'd firstly like to welcome all participants on this call and advise you that as the call is being recorded, the content will remain as an archive for the future to share after the event. Now, a particular thank you to all our panelists, led and moderated by David Moleshead, the Senior Counsellor for UK Export Finance in the MEAP region. Our panelists we're delighted to have here today are Zishan Iqbal, who's Director of Murabaha Solutions at the Etihad Credit Insurance, Natasha Saleh, who's Project Manager of the National Export Programme at Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, and of course Michelle Leong, International Export Finance Manager from UK Export Finance also. As we all know, export finance is a true enabler for international trade, and today's panelists are sharing their insights and expertise to build more awareness to our BBG members and wider audience. This webinar is a great demonstration of collaboration between the export finance agencies and the potential for increased activity throughout the supply chain here in the UAE, the UK and third-party countries. So it's now my pleasure to introduce David to start the session. Thank you, David.
Thank you, John, for your very kind words of introduction. We very much appreciate, first of all, the support given by the BBG teams in Dubai and Abu Dhabi in helping to organise this event today. Those that don't know me, I'm the Senior Counsellor, UK Export Finance, responsible for the origination of transactions that might be supported by UK Export Finance in the Middle East, Afghanistan and Pakistan, as John mentioned. And together with my colleague Michelle Leong, we are based in the British Embassy in Dubai. I've in fact lived in Dubai for over 20 years, having been a senior banker for the earlier part of my period here, and also a business owner in the UAE. I've been involved in the finance and international trade since 1980. This current period, because of the COVID pandemic, is unprecedented in terms of the challenges that's presented to all of us, not only as businesses, but also as individuals. Here in the GCC, this period is also coinciding with a drop in oil prices. So this is presenting another degree of complexity in terms of immediate outlook. But this is a time when there is potential market failure, because banks might be less willing to provide support, or credit insurers might be more reluctant to assume new risks, that export credit agencies are expected to step up. ECAs are expected to be there for the stormy weather as well as the fair weather. And as we'll learn today, there are 3 government export credit agencies that companies can reach out to in the UAE, depending on certain conditions. For every country, trade plays a major role, and the UK and the GC markets have a long trading history. So what are the stats for us to review? Total trades in goods and services, exports plus imports between the UK and the GCC was £43.7 billion in the 4 quarters to the end of the first quarter of 2020. That's an increase of 6.5% over the 4 quarters ending the first quarter of 2019. Within the GCC, the United Arab Emirates was the largest trading partner, accounting for 41.6% of all trade. Total trade in goods and services between the UK and the UAE was £18.2 billion in the first 4 quarters ending quarter 1 2020, an increase of 4.3% on the previous year. And total exports to UAE amounted to £12 billion in the 4 quarters to the end of the first quarter 2020, and that was an increase of 10.8% compared to the previous year. And so the UAE is the UK's 13th largest export market as at the end of the first quarter 2020. Hence, UK Export Finance has played a role for a long time in supporting UK companies import their goods and services into the UAE market and the wider GCC. At the same time, it's been recognised that the UAE, through its excellent logistics, is regarded as a regional hub into third countries. And this is the reason that many companies choose to set up business in the UAE. The governments in the UAE have acknowledged that those companies are using the UAE as a regional hub should receive more support to expand their activities. And therefore, just over 2 years ago, they set up 2 credit agencies, export credit agencies, similar to UK Export Finance, so that such support is available in the UAE. The theme for today is how can the growth of exports from the UAE be supported? And we have 3 presentations in turn. UK Export Finance, represented by my colleague Michel Lyon, Etihad Credit Insurance, represented by Yishan Iqbal, and Abu Dhabi Export Finance, represented by Natasha Nasali. Copies of their slide presentations and contact details will be made available afterwards, and as John said, the webinar is being recorded. After each presentation, I will ask each presenter some questions before moving on. And at the end of all 3 presentations, we will open up to a live question and answer session from the audience. So microphones should remain muted and cameras off while the presentation is taking place. So let's begin with UK Export Finance, and I will hand over to my colleague Michel Long, who will take you through an introduction to UK Export Finance and the support that is provided from this agency. Thank you, Michel.
Thank you, David. Next slide. All right, my name is Michelle. I joined UK Export Finance June last year, and together with David, we cover the business origination activities for the Middle East, Afghanistan and Pakistan region, based in the Dubai British Embassy. I've been living in the Middle East region for over 13 years now. The first 5 years was spent in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I was formerly a banker with Standard Chartered, responsible for corporate banking, covering the relationship management side, trade and supply chain finance, based in Malaysia, before being transferred to their London office as a director to onboard the Europeans and America's hedge funds and real money funds portfolio of names. Okay, a bit about UK Export Finance. UK Export Finance is the oldest ECA in the world. As of June this year, 2020, we are 101 years old. Our mission is to ensure that no UK exports should fail for lack of insurance and or financing. We are part of the UK government, working alongside the Department for International Trade, Her Majesty Treasury, and over 70 private lenders and credit insurers. Now, although we are 101 years old, UKEF is still winning awards for its innovation. We are named the best ECA by Global Trade Review and Trade Finance Global. Next slide. We provide financing in over 60 currencies, and last year UKEF has supported UK exports of goods, equipment, services and intangibles to over 200 countries. In terms of market coverage, there are 24 export finance managers scattered around the UK, while the international markets are covered by 12 international export finance representatives. There are currently each representative in Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, China, India, Turkey, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. David and myself covers the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Pakistan region, and UKEF will be expanding the network of international representatives over the coming 12 months. Next slide. In terms of products, UKEF does 3 things, out of which 2 activities, the middle and the right-hand column, guarantees and insurance, are covered by our 24 export managers in the UK. Are to help UK exporters or companies to fulfill contracts and get paid. Guarantees are products helping companies access the support they needed to fulfill contract, allowing them to take on more business and increase their turnover. Alongside the banks, UKEF will provide up to 80% risk guarantee through bond support scheme and or working capital scheme, with the remaining 20% taken by the banks. A new product which was launched this year called the Export Development Guarantee helps the UK exporters access high value loan facilities for general working capital or capital expenditure processes, which does not need to be linked to a specific export contract. This allows UK exporters to scale up their existing export activities in the UK and support investments such as research and development to increase their future exports. The minimum ticket size for our export development guarantee is £25 million, and it provides partial guarantees covering up to 80% of the risk to the lenders for a maximum repayment period of 5 years. The criteria to apply for export development guarantees is that companies must be able to demonstrate that it generated over 5% of their turnover from UK exports in each of the last 3 financial years, plus at least 20% of their turnover in one of those years. Amongst the companies in UK benefiting from our export development guarantee facilities are Rolls-Royce, Ford and Jaguar Land Rover. Now the right-hand column, insurance, are products helping exporters get paid for their contract through an insurance to guarantee payment where the private market is not able to provide cover, as UK export finance is not in competition with the private market. Now these products are covers against non-payment by the buyer and cover against not being able to recover the cost of performing a contract because of certain events causing its termination. Covers up to 95% of the contract value, and in terms of bond insurance policy, it provides protection against losses suffered because of unfair calling of the bonds and fair calling of the bonds caused by certain political events. The events covered by export insurance policies are insolvency of the buyer, non-payment by the buyer, and political and economic events outside the UK. However, in the Middle East, very often exporters do not face a non-payment from the buyers, but rather it is more an issue of late payment or disputed invoice. So in this respect, support for working capital is more appropriate than insurance for payment. The third activity undertaken by UK Export Finance is financing, and this is the activity that both David and I focus on in this region, and that is providing long-term financing to overseas buyers of UK goods and services, allowing companies to win contracts by making a bankable transaction more commercially attractive. This is done typically through our buyer credit facility, where UKEF will provide a guarantee to the bank to lend to the project sponsor at a commercially more attractive terms, such as a higher loan to value financing up to 85% of the contract or project value, excluding cost of land. Most banks will finance a contract of up to 60 or 70% of the contract value, but with UKEF, a buyer credit facility, we can go up to 85%. The second benefit is a longer tenor of repayment, allowing buyers to spread capital costs whilst exporters receive payment on delivery. Depending on sector, a typical construction project will benefit from a 10 years repayment period starting 6 months upon commissioning. So a door-to-door financing for a typical construction project is 12.5 or 13 years, taking into account 2.5 years construction period. Repayment period can go up to 18 years for renewable projects. Because of UKEF guarantee, which carries the full faith of the UK government, the banks lending to the projects will be able to zero weight the loan in their books. This will then translate to a more attractive interest margin charged by the banks to the project sponsors. So the project sponsors or overseas buyers will benefit from a higher loan to value financing, up to 85% of the contract value, longer repayment tenor and lower interest margin on their borrowings. UKEF charges a premium to extend our guarantees, and this is governed by the OECD rules. The minimum premium for a sovereign borrower in UAE is 2.5% of the loan amount, one-off fixed payment which can be debited to the loan account and amortized over the tenor of the loan. I would like to highlight another new product launched this year, which is an allocation from our Majesty Treasury for £2 billion called Direct Lending Facility for renewable projects and clean growth projects according to the Green Bond Principles, and it is available in all markets. Now, clean growth projects are wide-ranging, and it covers, amongst others, renewable energy, infrastructure facilities such as waste management and wastewater treatment, transportation, anything to reduce cars and buses that emits greenhouse gases off the road, green buildings, and etc. The banks in this case will act as a pass-through, as a direct lending facility will be funded directly by our treasury at SIR rates, which are the commercial interest reference rate fixed for the entire tenor of the loan. Under the OECD guidelines, the SIR rates are fixed every month on the 15th, and the current SIR rates for tenor of over 8.5 years For US dollar is 1.46% fixed. For pounds, 1.05% and euro 0.38%. Next. So under eligibility, to activate UK export finance, we need a minimum threshold of 20% UK content in the projects or contracts. All our lendings for projects will have to adhere by the environmental, social, human rights and due diligence process. The banks, the arranging banks has to be acceptable to us. It has to adhere to sustainable lending rules. Our current policy market risk appetites are available on our websites. Next. Oh, I've covered UK content. UK content covers goods, services, and intangibles such as IPs. It's important to demonstrate that the certificate of origin comes from the UK. Next. That finished my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks.
Can you just tell us about some of the projects that UK Export Finance has been involved with here in the UAE? Maybe just mention one or two of the projects that UK Export Finance has been involved with.
Okay, Middle East is the most active regions for UK Export Finance. Over the last 3 financial years, UKEF exposure to this region is over 60%. Many of the iconic projects are supported by UKEF, such as the construction of the Coca-Cola Arena, the One Central DWTC projects, the construction of the waste management company, the BR headquarters, are all supported by UK Export Finance. Late last year, we signed a contract to provide financing of more than £350 million to support the local Al Shafa Group ASGC for the construction of the Masa Al Arab project, the Curve Hotel next to Bush Al Arab. Projects such as Blue Water, City Walk are all supported by UK Export Finance.
Okay, Michelle, just one more question. So all of these projects will have had a minimum percentage of UK content to be able to secure UKF support, is that correct?
Yes, our mission is to ensure that no UK export should fail for lack of financing or insurance. So to activate UK Export Finance, there must be a minimum UK content in the projects or contracts. The absolute minimum is 20%, but for new projects, we aim for a higher 30%. We find that through our support held in the UK or now on virtually, we can achieve this. For example, Coca-Cola Arena, we achieve close to 40%, where there are 167 UK supply chain contracts in the project. Masa Al Arab projects, we achieve above 35% UK content.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. So you just heard that UK Export Finance can only lend its support if there's a minimum amount of UK content on the contracts and projects being supported, because after all, it's being funded by UK taxpayers' money. This segues neatly into our next presenter. Now, I know there are probably more than 5,000 companies in the UAE that have a UK connection, but in terms of their business model, they do not necessarily need to import content from the UK to undertake export business from the UK into third markets. And until recently, the only support that might have been available was from the commercial banks. But now we have in place Etihad Credit Insurance to complement and enhance the bank's activities. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my great friend, Ishan Iqbal, from Etihad Credit Insurance, to give us an introduction to Etihad Credit Insurance, and he will explain the range of services and products that have been provided to support companies based in the UAE. Over to you, Ishan.
Thank you, David, and a very good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for British Business Group for organizing this important session, and thanks to my colleagues from ADEX and UKEF to join me. And I'm very much honored to be there on this platform. Just to introduce myself, my name is Ishan Iqbal. I'm the director of Maraba Solutions, and I also take care of medium and long-term and political risk insurance function within ECI. ECI was established as an ECA in 2018, and coming from a mixed background of trade finance, banker, and working in a multilateral organization, it was a very good opportunity for me to join the team and setting up an ECA in a country, and you don't see that happening every day. So I think we are really lucky to be part of ECI's team. And as a federal government organization, we came into existing in 2017 through a cabinet resolution, and we started operation in 2018. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, and we are operating as a UAE federal ECA. We are 50% owned by the federal government of UAE, and 50% are owned by Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Ras Al Khaimah, Fujairah, and Ajman. Our chairman is His Excellency Federal Minister of Finance, Sheikh Hamdan, and our deputy chairman is the new Minister of Trade, the new Minister of Foreign Trade, Dr. Thani Al-Zayudi, and we are expected to play a catalyst role in the promotion of UAE's non-oil export, trade, investments, and strategic sector development in line with UAE 2020 vision. Although we are not that old, UKEF carries massive experience, so we are relatively a new kid on the block. But our aim is similar. We share the same values and objective and mission of UAE, and UKEF's mission to support UK exporters. Likewise, we are here to support UAE exporters. Next slide, please. So our mission is to ensure commercial and non-commercial risks associated with export and re-exports of goods, work, services, and foreign investment of UAE-based companies through a range of conventional and Sharia-compliant export credit, financing, and investment insurance solutions. I think it's worth mentioning that we have recently launched our Islamic solutions three days ago during the annual investment meeting Congress. And we are looking forward to grow together, especially keeping in mind the immense potential of halal industry and Sharia compliant products and services, increased demands in this market. Next slide, please. I'll briefly touch upon that when and why do you need credit insurance. Next slide, please. And this slide actually talks about that who can be the potential users of credit insurance. So if you sell goods or services on business to business, if you consider providing credit terms to your customer or extended credit terms, would you like to improve your cash flows? Do you have concentration of sales on specific customers? And what will be the impact of a non-payment of one client on your financial performance? And you have plans to expand. If any of the three questions answer is yes, I think credit insurance will help you to improve your businesses. And just to comment on UKEF and ECI's value proposition, which we can bring together, we are further strengthening our partnership through officially signing an agreement very soon. So the message we want to bring it to the public is that you have two ECAs who can support you. Especially if you are, satisfying the eligibility criteria of both. Just like UKEF, ECI also have a minimum local content contribution out of UAE, but we are slightly flexible in having that content calculation because we look at the contribution to the GDP of any company who can be, benefited by services. So the benefit, just to expand on the previous slide, the trade credit insurance benefits are, focusing on these 6 areas that we can summarize. One is the risk mitigation. You have, a balance sheet protection. You have a trusted partner with you who can be with you when you lose or when you, sustain a loss. Increase sales and expand competitiveness. I think this is a very important key message which we are bringing on the table, that we are focusing on increasing and shifting the focus from collection to expansion. And you have a trusted partner which can help you to extend global competitiveness through offering flexible credit terms to your buyers and also to provide or support the enhanced access to funding. The third is the facilitate financing, which is the enhanced access. So increased borrowing power means that once your receivables are insured by a federal government entity, those receivables become more bankable and sellable for the financial industry. Another important element which I wanted to talk about was the reduced bad debts allowance. So that can directly, positively impact your bottom line profits when, if the receivables are insured by a certain rated companies, the provisions in the balance sheet will be minimized or reduced. And then improve cash flows if you go and factor those receivables at the bank, and then enhance credit management system. Next slide. So that's a very brief introduction of ECI's ecosystem, which we have brought in the financial landscape of UAE. So we have risk expertise, we have bioanalysis, interest rate research, we have our own risk rating model, and we have our own artificial intelligence tool who calculates the risk weighted and risk ratings of each customer we underwrite. We have partnered very successfully in last 2 years after we were established in 2018. We have partnered with banks, we have partnered with ECAs, we have partnered with Chamber of Commerce, we have partnered with other insurance providers, and our reinsurance partners include ECAs as well as commercial entities and multilateral organizations. We have guarantees and risk mitigation tools available. We have already experienced a couple of claims during these 2 years, and we also offer the debt collection support for our clients. And a very interactive tool we offer, an online access for portfolio management. We have a huge information, access to a database which is comprising of 360 million buyers globally. Once you become a partner or a policyholder with ECI, we'll give you that access to that database. And these rating agencies and information sharing service can be extremely important because all your buyers are monitored and looked after at any point of time. So any of the buyer will have difficulty or default in any part of the world, you'll be immediately notified because that will be flagged in the system. And last but not least, our products and services, which I'll briefly touch upon in the next few slides, will show you what are the customer segments we are targeting. Next slide, please. Yes, so this slide shows the complete product suite ECI has. We have products for small and medium enterprises, we have products for banks and financial institutions, we have products for large corporates, and we have products for investors. Briefly touching upon where my colleague Michelle has touched upon the eligibility criteria of UKEF, where 20% of the goods are coming out of UAE, and based on UAE's ground dynamics of the economy itself, if you're also having a presence in UAE where there is certain value addition being done in UAE and you are exporting to a third country, we can really partner together, both the ECAs, and can offer you a solution. I will also touch upon our collaboration with ADEX, being the funding partner with ECI, because we only provide the insurance and guarantees and ADEX will provide the funding. We can also partner with ADEX in terms of fulfilling your requirements, starting from buyer's credit structure. I think my colleague Natasha will briefly touch upon. So the message we want to give to you as a very experienced businessman in UAE, that ECI is here, UKEF is here, and ADEX is here. We're all together to support and to help you penetrate into new markets. Next slide, please. I think that concludes my presentation. Thank you, David, and over to you.
Thank you, Yashan, for an excellent description of the current activities of Etihad Credit Insurance. I'd just like to sort of endorse what you were saying in your presentation, that UK Export Finance has signed already a cooperation agreement with ECI, and we're about to finalise very shortly a reinsurance agreement. This means that we can work jointly on transactions where a lead contractor is sourcing from the UK and the UAE into a third country, and we're already in advanced negotiations on a transaction in another overseas market where we hope that this transaction will be concluded very soon. So just a couple of questions which come to mind before we move on to the next presentations. Firstly, Hisham, what has been your experience since the beginning of the pandemic? How has your business been impacted as ECI this year?
David, I mean, to be honest, I think we have been really blessed by a country which is leadership is extremely supportive and proactive in these difficult times, and coupled with the fact that our senior management is also cognizant of the fact that how important an ECA role can be, especially in these times. And I think I'm very happy to bring it to knowledge of this forum that we have increased our risk appetite in last couple of months. We have not reduced any risk exposure. Rather, we have offered enhanced capacity to the UAE corporates. Now, that's number one. And second is we have insured only in last 6 months. You might have seen in the news worth of $1 billion of export and domestic trade, and that has been protected by ECI. So that is a role which we have to, we have to play. We have played so far, and we are looking forward to play more role in collaboration with the stakeholders across all segments.
Thank you, Yashan. I think to have underwritten over 4 billion dirhams of business in the first half is a very impressive number. What are the main areas of support you have been providing, and who have been some of your financing partners who assist you with the provision of these services?
Most of these services work, in the short-term credit insurance. We also have issued a couple of medium long-term, but very specifically for single risk exposure basis. And in looking at the partners, I would say that thanks to all of our partners, right, including Chamber of Commerce, including ECAs like yourself and ADEX, and our reinsurance partners as well, because I would also like to mention that our capital allows us to go for a certain threshold, but with our very strong backup or partnership which we have established, thanks to our finance and risk underwriting team and commercial underwriting teams, we managed to get a very large quota share treaty signed last year in addition to our AA- rating. That treaty really helped us and would help us with unlimited capacity and unlimited, reach out to these risk exposure. So I think partly our success is because of our strategy, leapfrog strategy, capitalizing on our partnerships, including all the stakeholders. It includes financial institutions, it includes ECAs, including reinsurance partners, and ECI's team.
Okay, thank you, Yushan. We've now heard from Etihad Credit Insurance how they can work independently or with partners to ensure that UAE companies can receive assistance to fulfill or get paid for export contracts that they undertake. But what is the situation if an overseas buyer is expecting the exporter to arrange long-dated financing in order to secure the contract? In the current environment, it's likely to be more difficult to expect banks to undertake this cross-border lending. And this is where Abu Dhabi Export Finance, which was set up in 2019, comes into play. They have the objective to assist exporters to provide this kind of finance that might be necessary in this regard. Natasha Saleh is the project finance executive of ADEX, and I have great pleasure in inviting Natasha to provide more details on the activities of ADEX. Thank you very much, Natasha.
Thank you, David. I would like to start by thanking BBG and UKIF for giving me the opportunity to present ADEX services. As well, I would like to thank all the members of BBG who have attended today and taking time out of their busy schedule. My name is Natasha Saleh. I am with Abu Dhabi Exports Office. I joined Abu Dhabi Exports Office 2 years ago. We were at that time National Export Program that was being established under Abu Dhabi Fund for Development. I have been in banking for over 2 decades, covering wholesale banking, risk, remedial management, so on and so forth. When I joined ADFD 2 years ago and knew that I will be part of this amazing team headed by my boss on establishing Abu Dhabi Exports Office, it just gave me an immense pleasure and a learning experience that is out of this world. Now, let me just start by giving you all a brief information about who Abu Dhabi Exports Office is. Charmaine, if I can have the next slide, please. Abu Dhabi Exports Office is an entity that was established by Abu Dhabi Fund for Development. It is part of an initiative that was taken by the Abu Dhabi government and Abu Dhabi government leadership in order to assist with the sustainability of UAE businesses and allow UAE exporters to reach to achieve a global reach, I'm sorry. And through this, we want to benefit the economic growth for the UAE. I'm proud to say that ADEX, or Abu Dhabi Exports Office, is the first entity that is fully dedicated to provide export financing in UAE. The first UAE entity, let me correct that information. We support UAE exporters by offering their buyers financing. So we entertain buyers credit financing. Charmaine, next slide, please. Now, the reason why we decided to go into export financing and buyer's credit in particular is basically to build a diversified and sustainable national economy and to become an active international trade partners. David indicated earlier that UAE has an amazing logistic base infrastructure. We have over 40 entry to exit points in UAE, be that seaports, airports, or land road ports. We are considered geographically one of the best locations to be in between East and West. So there is nothing stopping us from being one of the top destinations through which export can be routed. And again, to enhance the competitiveness of the UAE products, most importantly, to protect our national companies, to protect our exporters from defaults and non-payment risks, to allow our exporters to enter new markets, and also to fill a gap that is currently available in the market. The banks in the market offer financing to the local exporters. However, there isn't any financing available, or it's very limited, that is offered to the overseas buyers, through which the UAE exporters can have their cash flow properly maintained. So we consciously took the decision of entering into buyer's credit program and to start through this program. Next slide, please. The benefit to the UAE export community is basically now they can safely enter into transactions in international markets. Earlier, there might have been certain resistance or in entering into international markets, mainly because people didn't know much of risks that are associated in those markets, whether it's cross-border risk and trade barriers that might be available. So through ADEX financing for export buyers, we are trying to eliminate those barriers and to cover those risks by minimizing them. Direct payment from ADEX to UAE exporters. So what we have over here is that when we go enter into a buyer's credit facility, what we are offering the UAE exporter is the ability to get their cash flow on time. And this is one of the crucial points. Any businessman, the important thing for them is to have a proper sustainable cash flow. So through ADEX, the UAE exporter can have an efficient cash flow system without taking additional debt on their shoulders. So the risk portion is handled by ADEX. The payment on time is ensured to the UAE exporter through an Abu Dhabi government entity. We are and funding the overseas buyers, so they are having another form of financing apart from whatever is commercially available to them in their local market, as well as we take off the shoulder of the exporter to sit and talk about a lot of times the credit terms. What happens is a lot of times the exporter wants a longer payment term, a longer credit term. So by ADEX coming in, you can have your credit term shorter with the exporter, with the importer, I'm sorry, and ADEX can give the longer and the deferred credit term to the importer. We have allocated around 550 million in 2020 to cover these transactions, and I'm happy to say that most of these amounts have already been allocated. Now, the thing is that because we started early this year, our operations, we were established late 2019. So our actual operation started early this year and COVID hit. So a lot of businesses were put on hold. But we have started to see from the second half a lot of transactions and exporters coming and talking about the new transactions that they want to enter overseas. Can I have the next slide, please? We offer two main lines of financing. I'll go more into details of the direct financing in the upcoming slides. Basically, direct financing, we are offering loans or guarantees to support the overseas buyers. Indirect financing, I will just go over it very briefly because it's not related to exporter and importer as much. Over here, we establish a network with banks internationally, whereby ADEX establishes lines of credit with overseas banks through whom they would support their financing for their customer base. So we are indirectly supporting them in their liquidity needs to support lending to their borrowers, to their customer base. Next slide, please. Our goods and services cover basically, we look into construction projects. So if there is a UAE contractor or consultant that's carrying out a project overseas, we will fund the developer in the overseas market in order to support having the contract given to the UAE contractor, as well as UAE manufactured goods and services, in addition to the consultancies and other service sectors that are provided in international market by UAE. So it does not necessarily have to be an export coming out of UAE. We also support UAE companies that have overseas base. For example, if there is a UAE company, let's say ABC, and has got a factory established in, let's say, Kenya, and they're selling overseas or in Kenya, we will support the Kenyan party's purchase of the UAE entity that's set up over there. Next slide, please. Who are our target buyers? Our target buyers basically could be anybody. The borrowers could be government, financial institutions for the indirect financing. It can be state-owned entities or semi-government entities, and it can also be private entities. We basically cover, our classification covers financing for companies and entities based in OECD from 0 to 6. OECD has 0 to 7 classification, so 0 to 6 is covered by ADEX, and that's over 140 countries. So we have quite a large base through which we can have financing offered to them. Next slide, please. Now, let's go into a little more detail of what direct financing is. As I indicated, there are two types of direct financing products. One is loans. Loans, basically, all what it is that we offer loan or the facility to the importer, to the buyer of the UAE goods and service. And the only responsibility of the UAE exporter in this transaction is to ensure that they are delivering quality good to their importer. As long as the goods are meeting the required criteria and the importer has accepted that good, ADEX will make payment against that contract directly to the account of the UAE exporter and will offer the importer an extended payment term. The extended payment term can go up to 15 years, depending on the type of the project or the contract that is there. If the contract is infrastructure construction and they are the developers, the buyers, then we can go up to 15 years. If it's a simple supply contract or consumer good, then it could go anywhere between 6 months to 2 years, depending on what product is. Fixed asset can go up to 7 years. So it really depends on what type of transaction is going in. This is a non-revolving facility, i.e. that this facility would be given to the importer for that particular transaction that you have on hand. The minimum threshold over here is $3 million. So my financing needs to be a minimum of $3 million for me to enter into this particular contract. The $3 million, does not necessarily mean it needs to be one-time shipment. It can be a contract that you have for over 6 months or 1 year with multiple shipments, and we are willing to provide you financing to cover all these shipments throughout this period and make milestone payments as and when the transaction is delivered to the importer. The financing can go up to 90% of the contract value, depending on our study, and the currency, we are restricted now to UAE dirham and US dollar. Next slide, please. The guarantee product is exactly the same as the loans product. The only difference is ADEX is not the entity that actually disburses the funding. The funding is disbursed through a lending bank. However, ADEX is the party that would guarantee the overseas buyer with the lending bank. The terms are more or less the same. It can go up to 15 years, depending on the type of contract. The minimum coverage amount is about $3 million, and it can go up to 90% of the contract value. Next slide, please. The terms and conditions, one of the important terms is that the goods and service needs to be of UAE origin. The borrower should meet the minimum eligibility criteria. We do not cover crude oil. Our direction was very clear. They want to help the non-oil sector of UAE expand. And this is why we have excluded crude oil trade from the transaction. Our financing can go up to 90% and our currency is in dollar and dirham. Next slide, please. Now, how does our application process work? You as an exporter can come to us and ask us for a consultation. So you can come and tell us we have this particular transaction, would this meet your criteria, yes or no? What we can do, subject to there being an interest from the buyer in obtaining financing in form of a letter or a written request. So you come with the written request of the buyer and we look into the transaction and we give you a quick answer stating that yes, it meets the criteria. Let's move into the full due diligence and full appraisal stage. If it does not meet the criteria, we tell you at that point in time. If the criteria is met, we go into full due diligence. At that point in time, it is crucial that we get in touch with the buyer. We will no longer negotiate with the exporter, only up to the extent that the buyer wants us to. However, we go into full negotiation and study on the buyer by asking them all the required documentation for this particular process. And once the approval is obtained by the management, we can go into the execution stage and signing the agreement and dispersing the fund as per milestones. Next slide, please. This is how you can reach us. Our website is www.adfd.ae/ADEX, or you can email us at adex@adfd.ae, and our social media handles are Abu Dhabi Export. We do have an ADEX register available on our website under the Finance Goods and Service. If you want to register with us, please feel free to do so. And thank you very much. Next slide, please. David.
Thank you, Natasha. That was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Just one question before I open up to the general Q&A. Early in the year, both ADEX and ECI signed a joint MOU. Can you just give us a little bit of the background to this initiative?
Yes, we signed an MOU with ECI. We believe that ECI is an important and strategic partner to ADEX. Both of us are ECAs that work towards the UAE export community and helping the UAE economy achieve sustainability and international growth. Now, we have in this mandate, in this MOU, what we have worked on is various collaborations that we can work together on. Various collaborations, we are looking forward next year to launch few of them between us and them, as well as working on transactions together. There is a number of times where we have a transaction where we cannot go fully alone with it. So we go to ECI and ask them, are you willing to provide a cover for this particular transaction to make it workable for our client? And it's also vice versa. They do come back to us and say, we have a particular transaction, would you be willing to do the financing? ECI provides the insurance. We provide the actual funding against those transactions. We provide the loans. So our two companies, however, together to the export community at the end of it.
Thank you very much indeed, Natasha. Now, you've heard from all the panelists, and the floor is now open for questions. You can either ask questions by raising your hand, and we'll bring you on live. And if you're going to ask a question live, perhaps you could just give your name, the company you're representing, and who the question is for, which panelist it is for. Or either you can actually post it on the chat box, and I will pick up the question and direct it to one of our panelists. So as I say, the floor is open. I don't see any raised hands at the moment, and I don't see any questions in the chat box. Okay, I know there probably has been a lot of information that's been provided here over the course of this morning, and that we're all available to provide more information to you on a specific basis if you need to get hold of us. Ladies and gentlemen, you'll not be surprised to learn that as export credit agencies, we are all in regular contact with each other, as we are keen to explore ways in which we can combine to ensure that transactions can occur where we have optimised the support of our respective agencies. And indeed, I think that the initiative to set up ECI and ADEX in this market to undertake complementary activities it's actually provided a situation where we are very keen in the UK Export Finance to see a transaction whereby we can see there's a sourcing coming out of the UK, a sourcing coming out of the UAE, and together with ECI playing a role in terms of providing some reinsurance, and with ADEX providing some co-financing alongside us, we can probably go forward with a very sort of compelling financing option for an overseas buyer. So we're excited by the possibilities of working hand in hand with the other agencies here. So hopefully this morning's presentations have shed more light as what is available to support UAE companies to export with greater confidence in terms of fulfilling contracts, getting paid, or being able to offer their creditworthy buyers more attractive financing terms. In this regard, I would like to give a huge thanks to Natasha, Yeshan and Michelle for their excellent presentations. As I said earlier, the copies of the presentations can be obtained upon request, and a recording of the webinar will be made available shortly. Again, I'd emphasize any of us are available to follow up in specific inquiries offline at any time, because we're keen to support your businesses. Finally, our sincere thanks to the BBG teams in Dubai and Abu Dhabi for agreeing to host this event and the support of their teams in the organisation of this event. Ladies and gentlemen, have a good day and keep safe and well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Natasha. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you.